Hello and welcome to the Screen Podcast, which brings you insight and analysis of the international screen industries. My name is Matt Mueller. I'm the editor-in-chief of Screen. I am filling in today for our normal host, Wendy Mitchell, who is off enjoying a short break in North Carolina. Well-deserved break, of course, it must be said. So I will be filling in today for today's exciting episode, because today we're talking about the very big news, which is that the new head of the BFI Filmmaking Fund has been appointed. As we knew, Mia Bays, who's the current director, is coming to the end of her 5-year tenure, and Isabel Davis will take the post starting in October. Isabel had been at the UK Film Council 20 years ago, then previously also at the BFI as head of international from 2012 to 2018, before she joined Screen Scotland as their first ever executive director. And she's really made an impact there in her 8 years at the helm. There were 5 Scottish productions or co-productions at Sundance this year, for instance, which says a lot about what Isabel has achieved. So Isabel, when she joins the BFI, she's going to be running a team of around 19 at the BFI Filmmaking Funds, with a budget of about £20 million per year of national lottery funding to spend on development and production of UK independent films. This, of course, is one of those jobs that is probably one of the most important in the UK independent film industry. It's a real thought leader in the UK. And of course, it's a job that has a huge impact beyond UK borders. So big shoes to fill for Isabel. And today we're going to be speaking to 3 people who are going to bring their own insights into this appointment and what it means for the UK industry. That will be my colleague Mona Tabbara, and 2 UK producers of great esteem, Nicky, Bentham, and Joy Gharoro-Akpojotor. So I'm going to come first to Mona Tabbara, Screen's senior reporter for UK and Ireland, to hear how the industry has reacted and what they're saying about Isabel's appointment. Mona, how are you doing?
Very good, thanks. Matt, how are you? I'm
good, thanks. So Mona, you obviously have been following this story very closely. You wrote a piece even a few months ago looking when we knew the Filmmaking Fund role was up for grabs, and that there was a headhunter on the case speaking to various people in the UK industry about who might be the best candidate for this role. And then you've obviously done, now that we've had the announcement that Isabel is actually taking on the role, you've actually also done a follow-up piece, getting industry reactions to the news that Isabel has been appointed, which I think she was even mentioned in our first piece as one of the leading candidates. So, Mona, one of the key messages you had when you were doing our reaction piece was "few." Can you summarize this a little bit in terms of what people were telling you, both on the record and anonymously, about their feelings behind Isabel's appointment?
So I got an immediate email from one producer just with that one word saying "few." And I think there's a sense that with Isabel, you're getting someone who's a very skilled bureaucrat, meant in the best possible way. You need to be able to navigate the politics of a public sector role and all that comes with that. And Isabel has got a proven track record of being able to do that. With Screen Scotland, she was the first executive director of that newly created unit. And I think the numbers speak for themselves with what she's done there. Scottish screen industry investment from the screen sector rose from 627 million per year for the Scottish economy in 2021, 718 million in 2023. It's on track to reach $1 billion by 2031. So I think, as well as that, people have had very nice personal interactions with her. I think she's been very supportive of people, of producers, in moments of personal need when she's been working on projects with them, is the sense that I'm getting. So I think both personally and professionally, people are very excited about the appointment. I think also her work at Screen Scotland gives her a sense of insight on what's happening in the regions that I think people also are feeling excited about, having someone with that kind of meaningful relationship with the outer London filmmakers. I think off the record, there was a sense going into the recruitment process that producers wanted a fresh pair of eyes in the role. So someone who wasn't in the kind of boomerang of fund executive jobs, which does seem to be kind of what Isabel is. But I think at the same time, we're going to a period in which national lottery funding is under review by the UK government, which is how the filmmaking funds get funded. So it kind of feels like there's never been a more important time to have someone who does really understand the more political side of the job and why that's important.
Yeah, it feels, as you sort of say, it feels like an exciting appointment in a lot of ways because of the different skill sets that Isabel's going to bring to it. I mean, she's obviously spent many years at the BFI, so she'll be able to navigate that complicated organization, in a way where she won't have to learn the processes. She'll come in kind of, having that knowledge already. So that I think that's going to be a real asset for her. But she also seems to have the really international facing marketplace experience. I mean, in her role as head of international at BFI, but also when she was at Screen Scotland, that was felt like a very international role in terms of really trying to put Scotland on the international filmmaking map, which, as you pointed out with the sort of the numbers you flagged there, I mean, she seems to have been a real success at it. And I think you mentioned in your piece that there's even sort of an idea that's, the Scottish National Party wants to sort of take Screen Scotland out of Creative Scotland and kind of make it its own separate agency, not part of it, not sitting under an umbrella organization, which feels like a testament to what Isabel's achieved there.
Yeah, crucially with more funding for Screen Scotland. So I think that is really key. And yes, I do think it speaks to what she's done in the 8 or so years that she's been there.
Yeah, but let's not pretend that she's not going to face some daunting challenges when she comes into the BFI Filmmaking Fund. I mean, for better or for worse, obviously producers really look to the BFI to be perhaps more of an answer than it can be for solving all the problems of the UK independent film industry. We know this from our regular conversations with producers. I mean, people have big expectation on what the BFI can and should deliver. So, what are you hearing from your conversations with producers that they maybe some potential changes that they want to see, or any maybe developments or evolutions they'd like to see at the Filmmaking Fund?
Well, I think it's interesting because going into recruitment, a lot of producers did seem to want someone in that role who had, been a boots on the ground in the trenches producer who'd like lost an arm on the front line of producing. And Isabel isn't that. But I think at the same time, producers are saying we want funds to be less, and this isn't just the BFI, this is all the funds, public funds, to be less editorially involved, fewer notes, give us the money, let us get on with what our job is. Obviously, it's public money. There has to be guardrails. There has to be a level of checks and balances. But I think people are looking a little bit at how the UK Global Screen Fund works in terms of that's, not an editorially involved fund. There are certain criteria you have to fulfill to get the money, and then the money is yours. So I think people are looking at that a bit and thinking, could that model be adopted for the Filmmaking Fund? I think producers are also questioning if more commercial projects should be backed by the fund. I think we're in an era in which it's so difficult to get all projects off the ground. So the idea that some projects will be supported by the market isn't necessarily going to be true for what projects 20 years ago may have been supported by the market. There's an argument that the film fund's remit should be bigger because it is just so difficult for everyone right now in all genres. And, commercial projects can only help to get UK filmmakers more on the international map. I think producers have also been questioning if the BFI could do more to return to being cornerstone finance again. I think some I've spoken to have said the BFI are now only coming in very late on in a project. They don't want to be the first in. And it's a bit bonkers that, you're making a UK film, but Belgium or the Netherlands is giving you your first piece of financing. Does there need to be a revisit of how that process is working in practice? So I think ultimately producers are always going to want more money for their own projects, but I think it's time to sort of reflect on exactly how the fund can best serve the UK film industry as a whole.
Yeah. And, look, to be fair to, the current director of media, I mean, she was putting some money into big projects. It's not that was not happening. So there's definitely but I think you're right. There's a kind of idea that maybe, films that would really struggle to be in the market at all maybe there'd be a different emphasis going forward. And as we were sort of saying, maybe some of the decisions that Isabel made at Screen Scotland in terms of where they put their money could be lessons that she might bring to BFI as well. So it's kind of exciting, isn't it? So it's gonna be very exciting to see what Isabel does in the role, and of course we'll be talking about this for quite a long time because she's in the role for a few years. Any other talking points or concerns that you're hearing from producers in particular?
A big question is who will take Isabel's role at Screen Scotland. I think what happens with that, particularly as Screen Scotland is potentially going into this new exciting era of its own. So yeah, we'll see what happens. And I think there are a lot of Scottish producers who will be sad to see her go in this era, but one to keep an eye on.
Interesting times. And also, of course, we also look forward to what Mia does next. I mean, we announced during Cannes that she is going to be spearheading the UK Dogma films with some very high-profile filmmakers. We understand. We look forward to hearing more about that program as she develops it. But Mona, thanks so much for coming on. This is a story that's going to run and run, as we say. But thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Matt.
So we are now going to talk to Nicky Bentham. Welcome to Nicky Bentham, who is a producer at Neon Films and Oscar nominee. Some of her many, many credits include Brides, The Duke, Moon, and she is also co-chair of Pact Film Producers Group. So welcome, Nicky, to the Screen Podcast.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you here today. So obviously, big news this week, Isabel Davis's appointment, but big news last week, actually, Isabel Davis's appointment in the BFI Filmmaking Fund role. And we'd love to hear, in your particular capacity, both as an independent producer, but also working on that Pact group, what are some of the general feelings that you have right now about BFI, the appointment, and the BFI in general?
Well, I think that it's a really exciting appointment. I think that Isabel's brilliant and she's done amazing work in Scotland and is obviously an old friend of the BFI. I think that that's probably quite important at this kind of particularly challenging time that there's, to have leadership that really sort of understands the organization and as well as like the entire UK film industry as a whole. I think that, as we all know, there are some really particular challenges facing the industry. And I mean, the biggest one is that there's just not enough money to go around at the moment. So I think that, I think that the reason that Isabel is such good news is because a lot of people, I think, forget that the BFI has, and particularly, this role as director of the Filmmaking Fund, there are a number of different roles and responsibilities that come within that. Obviously, dishing out the lottery funding for making films is core to that and really central to the role. But then the BFI also acts as the lead body for the screen industries across the UK and also, engages with government. And it's important to have someone that understands what those kind of policy levers are that can be brought into play to kind of help with the bigger picture, not just sort of, in the weeds of those individual filmmakers and those decisions. So it's a big job and there are a lot of different hats to wear. I think that it's also, it's important to remember it's a public service role. So it's one of those positions where you're never going to be able to please everyone all the time. And I think having someone that's got really strong experience of that, and, the mettle to, face the industry, face all of us producers, and work alongside us. And as well as sort of, be able to, to be brave about some new ideas and take some risks. I think that Isabel encompasses all of those things. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, the feedback that we have is really positive about Isabel's appointment. And I think when we did an initial conjecture piece, a few months ago, her name was probably one that came out very near the top. I think obviously, I would guess in your role with Pact, you probably had some insight into the process along the way. But I'm just wondering what particular skills did you think were required for this role? What was the thinking behind, in terms of like Isabel being the best candidate for this job at this time?
Well, I think that I know that from many producers' perspective, there is a desire to potentially have a producer in that role. And, I think that there was always the potential for that. But I think it was really more important that the person taking on this role had a complete understanding of, the whole life cycle of filmmaking in the way that an independent producer should do. And alongside that, a real understanding of the kind of current landscape of public and private funding in the UK and also internationally, because, we're seeing more and more that, co-production and partnerships are really the only way to make things work, or, one of the best ways to make things work. So I think that it's really the kind of the breadth of Isabel's knowledge and experience that made her an ideal candidate. And I hope that, obviously, I can't speak on behalf of all producers, but I hope that that lots of producers would recognize that she does have a really intimate knowledge and understanding of the role that we perform, and also the kind of the wider industry and ecosystem as it currently stands. So I think that it's really that experience and that knowledge.
Yeah, and look, we all talk about how fairly or unfairly a lot of the industry looks to the BFI for not necessarily answers, but for support, for it's such an important organization in terms of what they do and the decisions they make, and so is always held up, both in high regard and high esteem, but also to very high standards. As a kind of top producer yourself, what do you have any sort of strong feelings on what the BFI Filmmaking Funds should do differently, especially to cope with with an industry that is changing so fast?
Yeah, I think that, it's probably something Isabel's probably going to take some time to, spend with the team and examine the current status quo and give some real thought and also discussion with industry and other stakeholders about what the next steps should be. But I think that it feels like maybe we're at a time where there shouldn't be such a sort of clear and narrow definition of what a BFI film is. I feel like perhaps with the world that we're in now, that should be opening up, and really, I think that making brilliant films that can compete on the world stage and that can find audiences wherever they may be it probably needs to be a real priority. I think that as filmmaking and as the BFI has evolved over the years, I think that the admin burden on producers and on productions has become kind of quite overwhelming. And especially when we're in a time where financing is scarce, it's getting harder to close those finance plans. And also, the actual job of making the film, when we're facing sort of inflation and, lots of challenging circumstances is also getting harder. And so, taking into account, I mean, all the producers that I know, have really high regard for all of the values that the BFI espouses. And so, the ideas of sustainability and diversity and inclusion are all very important, but balancing all of those factors, as well as the realities and challenges of making a film is just becoming harder and harder. And so I think sort of, it's not necessarily about more support. I mean, but I think a real awareness of what that burden is, kind of, the sacrifice that has to be made, and what perhaps is lost in the process is worth underlining. So, perhaps there are ways that that the Filmmaking Fund could look a little bit towards what the Global Screen Fund, some of the changes that they've started to introduce. And I understand it's a very different fund with a different remit, but they have taken steps to simplify some of the application processes, and also, in terms of the way that business and legal affairs and how they kind of close the deals is quite a bit swifter.
Those are really interesting points. I mean, those, and I think you touched on a lot of different things there. I mean, one of which is not necessarily, that the BFI should be putting money into more commercial projects, but certainly that an eye towards the market and an eye towards projects that have a chance to travel to festivals, etc. It is probably a strong factor that she maybe deserves more consideration. Is that something that you feel is right and correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that it's important to have an eye on the commercial viability of a film, as well as its cultural relevance and impact that it could make, in ways outside of just box office. So I think there's always going to be a balance to strike there. But I think that as I said, I think that maybe there should just be a wider definition or a wider understanding of what a BFI film is or could be. And perhaps that's a way to open up the fund to more filmmakers and more producers and a wider variety of projects.
That's exciting. Well, I mean, I think it feels exciting times, right? I mean, Isabel coming in, new perspective, new changes. We don't know what's going to happen with the national lottery funding. Obviously, that's a process that's being reviewed now through public consultation. But we all hope, of course, that the BFI will be still in prime position to get to sort of its share of that sort of funding. In your role at Pact, are there any other major concerns that you're hearing from UK independent producers that you think the BFI might be able to help with, beyond obviously the obvious questions around how do I get my film made, how do I get my film funded? Are there any other kind of issues that are being discussed right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the financing is a big one, and I think sustainability for producers and production companies is really key to the overall health of our industry. And I think something that we're hearing a lot of is how the UK tax credit, as brilliant as it is, and especially with the enhanced tax credit, or the IFTC, that we'd really like to help productions achieve more value from that tax credit, and especially in terms of BFI funded projects and publicly funded films in general, that sometimes the benefit of that tax credit is going to commercial partners rather than and the cost to the production and the producer is really significant. And so sometimes I think that can be at odds with, the purpose of public funding. So I think that, it would be really interesting to try and explore some more ways that we can ensure that there's a more realizable value of the tax credit that stays within the projects and the production companies. And, it's interesting to look at what Ireland does with their Section 481, by cash flowing the majority of the tax credit. It's become such an attractive proposition for international productions to go there. And it also makes it, really attractive for the local production companies, that they're not spending such huge amounts on cash flowing. So I think that would be an interesting thing to explore potentially, through the British Business Bank, through whatever kind of policy levers that the BFI can pull. I think that that should be a mission on the agenda.
That sounds like a very good mission. Well, I'm sure Isabel will be thinking about that when she comes into the role as well. But Nicky, any final thoughts before we finish today?
No, just wishing Isabel the best of luck, and I look forward to seeing how the Filmmaking Fund under her leadership can evolve and embrace the challenge of the next few years.
Yeah, I think we all do. And we'll be obviously carrying on this conversation for a long time to come. So I'm sure we'll have you back on the podcast very soon, Nicky. But thanks for joining us today.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Now I'm here with Joy Gharoro-Akpojotor, who founded Joy Productions in 2016. And in 2019, she really changed the landscape with producing this breakout hit, Blue Story by Rap Man. Great hit at the box office and something definitely fresh for the UK film industry. Also that year, she was a Screen International Star of Tomorrow. We love that. And a BAFTA Breakthrough. Her other credits include Boxing Day, Champion, forthcoming film Florid by Billy Lumby, and Animal by Ashley Walters, which was in Berlin. She's also a writer-director. Hello, Triple Threat over here. Her film Dreamers went to Berlinale in 2025. So she's certainly one of, I think, the busiest and the boldest of sort of the UK producers and creative powerhouses we're seeing. So, Joy, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for all the lovely things. You can be my PR.
Okay, yes, for a small fee. Okay. So my first question is kind of, what are your general feelings about what the BFI is doing right now? Obviously you've had some backing from them for many of those films, I think. Are they doing everything they need to do to help independent productions like you make?
I think BFI it's a hard job just for anyone there, because, it's the one, they probably have more money than Film 4 and BBC. So we always scrutinize how they use it. And we're at a time where it's just hard to make anything. So obviously, as somebody who's recently received money from them, for me, it's good in that they are doing what they can do right now. Obviously, there's always ways in which for you to do more in whatever shape or form that is. But I think where we are now, it's okay in the grand scheme of things. And if I look at the films that they have put money into and the directors they have supported recently, yeah, I think they're doing okay.
Okay, good. I like to hear that. Yeah. No huge complaints. You look at My Father's Shadow. Gosh, I love that film. Or Kneecap, and those have been some of the films that have come through Mia Baez's tenure there. And I think we would all be proud to, claim those films as part of the BFI landscape. And you told me off camera that you don't really know Isabel Davis that well personally. You kind of know of her. Were you excited when you heard she was hired? Do you think she's going to be a safe pair of hands, or do you not know her well enough to know?
I don't know her well enough to know, but I do think that it will be interesting to see what she's doing coming from Screen Scotland over into BFI. Be interesting to see, because for me, I think there's some films that have come out of Scotland that I think are quite interesting artistically, and be interested to see how she takes that sort of creative vision and brings it to like a wider template in the BFI, and how that materializes in maybe how their funding strategy might change, or where they want to place emphasis on. So I think I'll be interested to see, but I also think those will be exciting changes. I think that's what I'm looking forward to. There are things I would like to see happen, but I like to see what the initial sort of plan is. But I don't think they will be bad. It's what I'm saying.
Yes. Okay, good. So we'll see what she has in store. But yeah, I do think that sense of renewal and update and change is important for any public service
100%.
organization, any film funder that's using that public money.
Yeah. And it's good to learn from what hasn't worked before and how we could work better, or maybe some things just weren't working, so let's just change it. And that comes with renewal and new insight, because I assume part of her first job would just be getting a lay of the land, and speaking to producers and everyone alike, directors, whoever, and seeing what they appreciate from this past tenure.
Yeah. I think Isabel Snowden is working quite well internationally. Is that something you think could help, or do you want somebody who's more focused on the UK, in the UK?
I think that a bit of both. I mean, it's a hard one, because I feel like where we are now, part of me, especially just me looking at myself as a producer, I kind of want someone who's focused on the UK, just because I think across the board, it's just hard to make films. And I know people are saying let's do more co-pros, which I totally agree with. But when you're trying to make a British film for a British audience, a co-pro is neither here nor there.
Yeah, like Rat Man and Blue Story, you didn't really need a co-pro.
You don't need a co-pro,
it would have complicated that film and maybe diluted it.
Exactly. Same thing as like Animal, or Floridan. Florid especially is a very British film. So it's that thing of, where are you going to find the co-pro to make a film like that? So I think on one hand, I do want to have a clearer sense of how do we support filmmakers who want to make distinctively British films that can travel. But on the other hand, there's this idea of we should be more international and look outside a bit more. But I do think there needs to be an adequate balance between the two.
Yeah, I think that sounds, really smart. We're not like make British film great again over here. But being aware of the international landscape, and when that can help British film, of course, take advantage, but when it is going to interfere to... if you have a UK film, mostly for a UK audience, like a co-production route might not make sense.
It might not. Yeah.
What about, as a director, we see that lovely Dreamers poster behind you. We were all excited to sort of meet your writing and directing voice with that. And I'm just wondering, it's probably slightly different thoughts as a director, because as a director, you're just pushing to get your film made. And, I think the BFI Filmmaking Fund can back about 12 features a year, which seems low right now. How do you feel about what the BFI, either that fund or the wider BFI, could do to better help directors as well?
I think it's not just about the director. They are doing some things specifically when it comes to mental health and well-being, which I think is important. And they've increased the sort of money you can get towards that across the board. For me, it's more about how do we make sure films get made? And I feel like part of that is maybe going back to the BFI being the first person in and being the cornerstone financing and really supporting films that way. Because like I say, it's a hard landscape. So the idea that you have to go somewhere else to find money and then come back to an institution that really is all about supporting filmmakers.
Yeah, they have a cultural remit.
Exactly.
At least part of their remit is cultural.
So, and I think knowing that I've got the BFI support, I can go off and I can get some money and come back, whether as a director or as a producer, it's such an easier conversation. And I think there's something about just having that support psychologically that does actually make people go, yeah, I'm making a film. Maybe even going back to the days of, I feel like I'm saying back to the days, but you know, films are expensive to make, and you have films that sometimes are not that expensive to make, especially with a new tax credit. So is there a world in which, especially to support first-time filmmakers, as we all believe, you know, as we all said about budgets and how much harder it is to make your money back, is there a world in which you sort of do, as a BFI, you might do 950 or 800K or whatever, and that's fully financing a film that's maybe at about 1.1, 1.2? But you give all that money to a filmmaker, they get tax credit and maybe like a post deal or something, but that then means they can make their film. So I think it's just thinking about, for me, it's about how can we really support filmmakers and get films made? Because I think sometimes we're very hung up on it's got to be commercial. But for me, it's always like, what does that actually mean? Especially in today's day and age where even the films that are meant to be commercial aren't even making any money in the box office. So when we say commercial, what are we really talking about? And does it make sense to actually support filmmakers, especially if it's a first-time filmmaker who's got a good script, but is struggling to get all the money for many different reasons? Actually, probably isn't their fault. It's just the way the economy is. How do we support them actually make it from? I think for me as a director, generally that is what I would love to see more of.
You know, I think we hear a lot from UK independent producers very rightly saying, you know, parts of this system feel to be broken. You know, you've got to defer your fees, and are you ever getting them? You're certainly not being paid enough for years of work on a production. You know, it can be hard to cash flow things until you might be waiting to close finance after the film has started shooting, which is perilous. You know, do you see all those things? Are they impacting your work as well?
Yeah. I think, you know, as producers, we generally have a sustainability issue. As directors, we have a pacing issue. There's this thing of like, by pacing, I just mean like from when you make your first feature to your second feature, like how do we support that transition in a way that feels like the industry is way more behind you to ensure that we're not just making debuts, but we're making second, third, like we're growing filmmakers across the board. That is one of the things I'm also interested in as well. And I think as a producer, the sustainability issue, obviously it's about producer fees, because I think there's, you know, I said by there, I just want the industry, want producers to work with new filmmakers or not so new filmmakers and help get the film to the finish line. But if we as a producer can't sustain ourselves, I think there needs to be more thought around how producers are paid, and more, I guess, I want to use the word kindness, because ultimately nobody is on a salary. We're just going film by film. And then it's frustrating when you're having to argue with people who are on a salary about your fee for a film you were on
been working on for 8 years or something.
8 years, and only were paid 20,000, maybe even less. And now you're arguing to actually get your full, I don't know, 60K fee on that production, but you've only been working on it for 8 years, whereas the director will probably have had more money than you at that point in time. So I think there's you know, is that thing of the producers not feeling valued, because people look at producers to ensure the film gets made, to find the talent, to, I guess, also, I don't know, help the talent grow, but nobody wants to pay producers the money to actually do any of that. I think all producers should just call a boycott. We should just stop.
But, you know, I think you're due one, but we wouldn't get any cool films made. You know, like if there's no independent producers, and I encourage our listeners to go back and listen to Carlo Crestodina's episode when he talked all about this, because he was just about this sort of plight of independent producers. And if producers are sort of holding the middle of this industry together, and if they're not taking a chance or putting their second mortgage on their house to get a film made, then the film might not get made. And yeah, that's kind of not fair. I have a question that's kind of related to that, is that I mean, I'm not a producer. I do not have the patience nor the skills to produce a film. But I was really a fan of what the BFI did with the Vision Awards. And I was wondering if you ever got one of those. And for listeners who may be outside the UK who don't know what these were, it was a money that went to companies that they could maybe hire a new development person, or they could work across their whole slate. It wasn't just project by project, but it was helping independent producers sort of build their companies. And to me, people seem to love those. And then they were scrapped. And I don't really know why they were scrapped for some other reason. But did you ever have a Vision Award?
Yeah, I did. And honestly, the Vision Award is one of the best things that happened to me. It really helped me to build my slate. Also, it sort of helped me build my slate. Also helped me get in someone to help across development, and also just help sustain me for a while. And again, it's those things of like, how can you support producers? How can you support, like, where is that? The good thing about the Vision Awards, I feel like, is the building of companies, the sustainability, and also being able to build your slate. I think, obviously, financing is always an issue as producers. You're always trying to figure out, where am I going to get money from? When you want to develop things, you're always thinking, how am I going to pay for a book option? Because I'm fighting with people who have way more money than me. So I think the UK Global Screen Fund have something coming in, which is like a development slate funding or the other. I'm not sure when that's happening. But I think having that Vision Award or something like that coming back. And I think, for me, I think it can be in two tiers. I think you've got emerging producers. I think there's something for them, because I think it is important to think about, how are we supporting a generation of producers who are coming up and haven't made a feature film yet and want to make a feature film, but can't commit to it for whatever financial reason. How do we support those guys? And I think there also should also be some support for the people in the middle who maybe have made 2 or 3 feature films, but are finding it difficult to just be sustainable, because it is hard. And I think you can definitely find a way to do something to support those 2 fractions of people in order for us to sort of, be able to keep producers going and be able to think about how we can sustain our system of making films that keeps producers happy. Because, you hear stories of people who just sort of stop producing because they can't afford.
They just have to leave the industry if they can't. Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah. I think that's some good ideas. Everybody I talk to sort of misses the Vision Awards, but maybe they're coming back in different ways, but yeah, something to support producers like really outright, I think would be a good idea. Joy, any final thoughts for the BFI, or anything special you'd like to see them introduce on the horizon?
I mean, I do think we should also really think about BFI just putting money into one film, like we used to do back in the day. Just that sort of, if your budget is low enough, they just completely finance it. I think that's a helpful way to sort of get films made, is what I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a tough hill to climb.
I know, but it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but it's what I think they should do.
Okay. Yeah, we're here with blue sky thinking. So yeah, there's another idea out there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joy, for talking to us about that. We're glad to hear, even in challenging times, you're making it happen.
Trying.
When will Animal be out?
Later in the autumn. We haven't got a date yet. But
no date yet.
Yeah.
Great. So we'll look forward to seeing that. And I think Florid will be coming to autumn festivals. So we'll keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
And good luck with all the projects, Joy. And thanks for telling us some honest talk about what a producer, writer, director really thinks.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody who's tuned in to this week's podcast. That was a bumper episode, wasn't it? so much to wait and see what Isabel does in this very important job for the UK and beyond. So good luck, Isabel. Thanks especially to Joy and Nicky for coming on and sharing their thoughts. And a big thanks to Matt. If I don't get to North Carolina to eat my Bojangles chicken and biscuits once a year, I start to go a little crazy. So thank you, Matt, for stepping in. Thanks to the whole team at Screen who made this possible, especially our producer, Ellie Calnan, and our web editor, Orlando Parfit. And we'll see you again next Thursday. Thanks.